I kept my expression exactly where I needed it, neutral, pleasant, the face of a man enjoying a party. I have spent 38 years in civil engineering, and if that career taught me anything, it was how to hold steady while everything underneath was shifting. That evening, standing in the dining room of the Rosewood Inn in Canmore, Alberta, with a glass of Cabernet I hadn't touched, I was using every bit of that skill. My son had just walked back across the room to rejoin his fiancée, and my daughter was still standing close to me, her voice barely above a breath, her hand on my forearm. She had just said 4 words. "Dad, look into Nathan." Then she stepped back, smiled at someone across the room, and became a guest at her brother's engagement party again. I raised my glass. I nodded at my neighbor Raymond, who was talking to someone near the fireplace. I did not look at my son. I did not look at the woman standing beside him, laughing with her hand on his chest. I looked at the mountains through the window, dark against the last of the evening sky, and I thought, I have learned in my life that the moment you most want to react is usually the moment you most need to be still. So I was still. My name is Gordon Ashworth. I am 63 years old. I live on a 10-acre property outside of Cochrane, Alberta, on land that my late wife Diane and I purchased in 1997 when the price of anything west of Calgary was still reasonable, and when we were young enough to believe we had all the time in the world to fix up the old farmhouse at the back of the property. We never finished it. We got close. Diane passed away in the spring of 2019, a stroke. Sudden, no warning, and I finished the last of the renovations alone, because I needed something to do with my hands, and because finishing what we started together felt like the least I could do. I have 2 children. My daughter Claire is 31. She works as a forensic accountant in Calgary, a fact that will become relevant shortly. My son Brendan is 28. He is a structural engineer. He followed me into the field, which I will admit quietly made me prouder than I ever told him directly. He is a good man. He is careful and methodical at work, and he has always been, if anything, slightly too trusting in his personal life. Diane used to say he got that from me. I am not sure that was a compliment. Brendan met Natalie Osei at a work function in Edmonton about 14 months before the engagement party. She was introduced to him as a financial planner with a firm in the city. She was warm, funny, and exceptionally good at making everyone in a room feel like the most interesting person there. I noticed that about her the first time Brendan brought her to Cochrane for dinner. I noticed it the way you notice something beautiful that you cannot quite figure out, not suspicious, not yet, just observant. She was 34. She had grown up, she said, in Mississauga. She had studied finance at York University, worked in Toronto for several years, then relocated to Edmonton for a position at a wealth management firm. She mentioned the firm's name once. I stored it without knowing why. She did not have family nearby. Her parents had both passed, her father from a heart condition when she was young, her mother more recently. She had one older brother, she said, but they were not close. When I asked once, gently, why not, she smiled in a way that closed the subject without being rude, and said only that some families drift. I accepted that. Families do drift. By the time Brendan proposed, 11 months into the relationship, Diane's sister Margaret had already told me she thought the timeline was fast. I said what I believed at the time, that Brendan was not impulsive, and that if he had decided carefully. I trusted my son's judgment. The engagement party was held on a Saturday in late January. Brendan had chosen the Rosewood Inn because Natalie had mentioned once, apparently, that she had always wanted to see Canmore in winter. He remembered. That was the kind of man my son was. 62 people came. Her side of the guest list was smaller, a handful of friends from Edmonton, a colleague or two. No family, which she had explained in advance, and which no one pressed. The evening was warm and well organized. The food was good. Brendan gave a short speech that made 3 people cry, including Raymond, who has known him since he was 9 years old. I was standing near the window with my Cabernet when Claire appeared at my shoulder. She had been quiet most of the evening. Claire is not naturally quiet at parties. She is sociable, sharp, the kind of person who collects interesting conversations the way other people collect souvenirs. But she had been subdued since dinner. I had noticed and filed it away. She leaned in close, kept her eyes forward, and spoke without moving her lips more than necessary. "Dad, look into Nathan." Then she was gone. I did not sleep well that night. I called Claire the next morning at 7:30. I know my daughter, and I know that if she had wanted to tell me more at the party, she would have. She had said what she said deliberately, in the way she does everything deliberately, which meant she was measuring what I needed to know versus what she could actually confirm. I asked her to come to Cochrane. She arrived by 10. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee, and she put her phone face down in front of her, the way she does when she is about to say something she has been organizing in her mind. Her name, Claire said, is not Natalie Ose. I set my mug down. Her name, she continued, or at least the name she used until approximately 3 years ago, is Natalie Mensah. Different last name, same first name. I found this because one of my colleagues at the firm you've met, David Chow, he recognized her at the party. He worked briefly at the same Edmonton firm she supposedly works at now. He pulled me aside after dessert and told me that, as far as he knew, Natalie had left that firm under circumstances that were not discussed publicly, but were not good. He was not certain about the name, but he was certain about the face. And you confirmed this how? I haven't confirmed anything, Dad. That's why I'm telling you instead of telling Brendan. I have a suspicion and a second-hand account from a colleague who is 90% sure. That's not enough to say anything to anyone, but it was enough to say something to you. I understood. This was exactly the right call. She had come to me not to start a fire, but to hand me a match and ask me to be careful with it. What do you think is happening? I asked. She looked at her coffee. I think someone should find out what's in the wealth management agreement Brendan signed last month. I had not known Brendan had signed any agreement. When I said this, Claire nodded slowly, which told me she had known I didn't know, and that this was the part she had been most careful about. He mentioned it to me in passing, she said. Natalie apparently helped him restructure his personal investment portfolio. He framed it as her doing him a favor, using her professional expertise. He seemed pleased. I didn't think much of it at the time. I thought about the property in Cochrane. The investments Diane and I had built carefully over 4 decades. The account I had set up for Brendan when he graduated university, the one that had grown quietly for 6 years. How much is in Brendan's portfolio? I asked. Enough, Claire said. Depending on the structure of whatever he signed, enough. I have a friend named Walter Kowalski. We have known each other since our 30s, when we worked for the same engineering firm in Calgary and used to argue over lunch about whether the city was planning its infrastructure for the next 20 years or the next 2. Walter retired before I did. He now fills his time with fly fishing, woodworking, and a network of connections that would impress a diplomat. One of those connections is a private investigator in Calgary named Sandra Fitch, whom Walter had used once during a business dispute and described to me as thorough, discreet, and expensive in a way that told you immediately the expense was worth it. I called Walter that Sunday afternoon and told him only what I needed to, that I needed a recommendation for someone who could verify a person's professional and personal history, and that I needed it kept between us. Walter did not ask questions. He gave me Sandra's number. I met with Sandra on Tuesday at her office near 17th Avenue. She was in her mid-50s, practical and unhurried, with the manner of someone who had heard many versions of many stories and was not particularly surprised by any of them. I told her what I knew, the name change, the employment history, the investment agreement. She made notes on a yellow legal pad. Then she looked up and said, "Do you have a photograph?" I did. I had printed one from the engagement party. She studied it, said nothing, made another note. Then she said, "Give me 10 days. Do not speak to your son, and do not speak to this woman. Carry on exactly as normal." I said I could do that. She looked at me with a kind of measured respect and said, "Most people can't." I drove back to Cochrane in the dark, through the kind of February cold that settles into the highway and makes the whole world feel pressurized and still. I thought about Diane, who would have known what to do. She always knew. She had a clarity about people that I admired and never fully developed in myself. I think she would have seen something earlier than Claire did. She had that instinct. I thought about Brendan, 28 years old, brilliant at his work, in love in the way that confident young men fall in love completely, without auditing the foundation. I had done exactly the same thing at his age. In my case, I had been lucky. I had to make sure he was lucky too. Sandra called me on day 9. She asked me to come in the following morning. I sat across from her with my coat still on. "The woman your son is engaged to," she said, "has used at least 3 names in the last 7 years. Natalie Mensah, Natalie Cole, and currently Natalie Ose. The last name Osei appears to have been adopted approximately 2.5 years ago. There is no legal record of a name change in Ontario, Alberta, or British Columbia. I did not say anything. She did work at the Edmonton firm, Sandra continued, for 11 months. She left following an internal review related to the management of a client account. The review did not result in charges, but her registration as a financial planner with the relevant regulatory body was suspended. That suspension is currently active. She is not legally permitted to be providing financial planning services or managing investment accounts. I thought about the agreement Brendan had signed. I thought about the phrase doing him a favor. The investment restructuring she performed for your son, I said. Sandra nodded. If she represented herself as a licensed financial planner, and if she received any compensation or gained any financial benefit from that arrangement, that is a serious regulatory violation, at minimum, potentially criminal, depending on the specifics of the agreement. Is there a pattern? I asked. Other relationships? She paused, which was not the same as hesitating. It was the pause of someone choosing their words with care. There is a relationship in her history, approximately 4 years ago in Toronto, with a man in his early 30s who had recently inherited a significant sum from a parent. The relationship lasted just over a year. It ended. He subsequently filed a civil complaint related to financial misrepresentation. The complaint was settled out of court. The terms are sealed. The room was quiet. She is strategic, Sandra said. Patient. She selects people who trust her, and she moves slowly enough that the trust is real by the time anything happens. In your son's case, he is young, he earns well, and he will inherit. She has been in this relationship for 14 months. She has already gained access to his portfolio. The engagement is 3 months old. And the wedding? I asked. I already knew the answer. Scheduled for June, she said. Alberta. Once they are married, the legal landscape changes considerably. She slid a folder across the desk. Everything is documented. Copies of regulatory records. Correspondence I was able to obtain through legitimate channels. The civil complaint reference number in Toronto, and a timeline. If you choose to engage a lawyer, this is what they will need. I picked up the folder. It was heavier than it looked. I called a lawyer I had used for the Cochrane property, a woman named Elizabeth Hartman in Calgary, who specializes in estate and family law, and who had the specific quality I needed at that moment, which was that she did not try to make the situation feel better than it was. We met on Thursday. She reviewed Sandra's documentation. She asked me several precise questions. Then she laid out exactly what I was dealing with in language so clear and unvarnished that I was grateful for it. Your son signed an investment restructuring agreement with a woman who is not legally permitted to provide those services, she said. Depending on the specific language of that agreement, she may have a claim against the restructured assets, or may have positioned herself to access them in ways that are difficult to unwind after marriage. The good news is that nothing is finalized. The bad news is that nothing is finalized changes in June. What do I need to do? I asked. You need to tell your son, she said, with documentation, not an accusation documentation, and you need to do it in time for him to act before this goes any further. He loves her, I said. She looked at me without softening the look. I understand that, she said, but love is not a legal strategy. I asked Claire to be there. Not to speak for me, she had done her part, and more than her part, but because Brendan would need to see that this was not a father's overprotective instinct, that it was not about control, that it was verified and documented, and brought to him with nothing but care. We drove to Edmonton on a Saturday. Brendan was home. He answered the door, surprised to see us, pleased, the way he always is. He offered coffee. He was wearing the sweater Diane had given him 3 Christmases ago, the dark green one, and for a moment I had to take a breath before I could begin. I asked him to sit down. He sat. He looked at my face, and the way he looked at my face told me he already knew something had shifted. I need to show you some things, I said, and I need you to let me get through all of it before you say anything. Can you do that for me? He nodded. I put Sandra's folder on the table. I put Elizabeth's written summary beside it. I sat across from my son, and I began. I told him about David Chow's recognition, about the names, about the regulatory suspension, about the civil complaint in Toronto. I told him about the investment agreement, and what Elizabeth had said about its implications. I said all of it in the same tone I had used across 38 years of engineering, steady, factual, because the facts were enough. They did not need my emotion to make them heavier. When I finished, the room was very quiet. Brendan looked at the folder. He did not open it immediately. He sat with his hands flat on the table, and I watched him do what I had seen him do since he was a boy, go somewhere inside himself, get quiet, think. After a long time, he said, "How long have you known?" 11 days, I said. Did you, he stopped, started again. Did you ever consider that you might be wrong? Yes, I said. That's why it took 11 days. He opened the folder. He read for a long time. Claire and I drank our coffee and did not speak. The refrigerator hummed. A truck went by outside on the street. When he closed the folder, his eyes were dry, but his jaw was tight in a way that I recognized. It was the face he had made at Diane's funeral when he was 24 and did not want to cry in public. He had managed it then too. "Where is she now?" he said. "She said she was visiting a friend in Vancouver this weekend," I said. He nodded slowly. "She's in Vancouver," he said. "Not a confirmation, an accounting." He looked at me, then at Claire, then back at me. "I need some time," he said. "You have time," I said. "That's why we came now. I will not detail every conversation that followed. Some of them belong to Brendan, and they are his to keep. What I will say is that he did not do anything impulsive. He did not call her that afternoon. He called Elizabeth Hartman himself and asked to review the investment agreement with independent legal advice, which Elizabeth arranged. He spent 4 days with the documentation, reading everything Sandra had compiled with the same methodical attention he brings to a structural load calculation. On the 5th day, he called me. "The agreement has a clause," he said. She explained it to me as standard language. "It isn't standard language. Elizabeth says it would have been very useful to someone with access to both account information and a marriage certificate." I did not say anything. "I've had the agreement reviewed and flagged," he said. "Elizabeth is handling the regulatory complaint to the financial planning body. And I've talked to a family friend who is a detective, Raymond's son-in-law, actually, and filed a preliminary report with the Edmonton police." "Brendan?" "I know," he said. He was quiet for a moment. "I know, Dad." We stayed on the phone without talking for a little while. I think we both needed the line to be open. "She called me yesterday," he said eventually. "She was back from Vancouver. She wanted to plan the venue walkthrough for next month." "What did you say?" "I said I was in the middle of something at work, and I'd call her back." A pause. "I haven't called her back yet. I will tell you how it ended, because you have been patient enough to stay with this story, and you deserve to know. Brendan met with Natalie on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after Claire and I drove to Edmonton. He met her at a restaurant, not at her apartment or his. He brought nothing with him. He said only that he had been doing some thinking, that he had some concerns about their relationship and the timeline, and that he did not think they should proceed with the wedding. She pressed him. He did not elaborate. He had been advised not to, and he was disciplined enough to follow that advice. She became angry. Then she became calm in a way that was not the same as calm. Then she said something that, when he told me about it later, he described as a sentence that felt pre-prepared, like she had kept it in reserve. She said that she had invested a lot in this relationship and that she hoped he understood what that meant. He said he did. He left. He paid for both their drinks on the way out. He is, as I said, a good man. The regulatory complaint has been filed. The Edmonton police have opened a file. Elizabeth Hartman has been in contact with the lawyer who handled the Toronto civil matter. Whether any of this results in charges or formal consequences, I do not know. That part is no longer mine to carry. I handed it to the people whose job it is to carry it. Brendan is doing what people do when something they believed in turns out to be built on false ground. He is going to work. He is calling his friends. He came out to Cochrane 2 weekends ago, and we walked the property in the cold, just the two of us, not talking very much. He looked at the farmhouse, the one his mother and I restored, and he said, "It looks good, Dad." I said it took a long time to get right. He smiled at that, just a little, and we kept walking. I want to say something to anyone who might be watching this, because some version of it is familiar to you because you have a son or a daughter, or you are a son or a daughter, and something in this story touched a place you recognize. Trust your instincts, but do not act on them alone. Instinct is the beginning. It is the thing that makes you say, quietly, to the right person, "Look into this." What comes after instinct, the verification, the documentation, the careful conversations, that is what transforms a feeling into something you can actually use. Do not confuse love with suspension of judgment. The deepest love I know, the love Diane and I built over 30 years, the love I have for my children was never the kind that required me to stop thinking. Real love and honest scrutiny are not opposites. They are partners. Diane knew that. She loved me without illusions, and she expected the same in return, and our life together was better for it. When someone you love is at risk, your job is not to make the problem disappear for them. Your job is to give them the truth, documented and clear, and then to respect that they are an adult who can carry it. Brendan did not need me to rescue him. He needed me to hand him the folder and trust that he would know what to do with it. He did. Run a name, verify a credential, cross-reference a story that does not quite fit. These are not acts of distrust toward the person you love. They are acts of care. There is a difference, and it matters. Before you walk into a legal commitment with someone, a marriage, a business partnership, a financial agreement, ask yourself what you actually know and what you have only been told. Then find out if those two things match. In my experience, the people who have nothing to hide do not object to the looking. And finally, tell someone. Claire told me, and I told Walter, and Walter trusted me to Sandra. And Sandra's work gave Brendan something solid to stand on when the ground shifted beneath him. None of us could have done this alone. We did not have to. That is what family is. When it is working the way it is supposed to, Brendan will be all right. I know this not because I am his father, and fathers believe things about their children, but because I watched him sit at that kitchen table in Edmonton and read 30 pages of difficult truth without flinching, and then ask what he needed to do next. Diane raised a good man. We both did.